Already? When I first started the school, I was in Brownsville, Oregon. When I started, I was 6 years old when I started. I had quite a little ways to walk. My folks lived kind of up on the hill. They had a 3-acre place up there. And I had to walk down quite a little ways to school. And there was a flume there, although that didn't interrupt me any, but some of them walked the flume on top of the flume. They had a sidewalk built on top of it. But the way that I went to school, I went down the sidewalk, and I went right past a little Negroes, a whole family of them. There was a man and his wife, and I believe there was 3 girls, Harry, Sissy, and Alma. Those were the 3 girls that they had at that time. And they went to school when I did. They got started into school, of course, along different times, different ages. And Harry, he's the boy, and he started about the same time that I did. And we always got along pretty good, him and I, but some of the boys didn't get along with him very well because he was a Negro. But he was a pretty fair lad anyway, just himself. He was a pretty good boy. And I used to get down there in time to walk with him to school, and his dad was a great big Negro. He was awful big and broad, husky-built fella. And he was very black Negro. And he run a barber shop. He was a barber. And I used to go down in time to walk with Harry on down to school. Well, the old man, he used to walk down as far as the barber shop behind Harry. He wouldn't let him go alone because lots of the kids would pick on Harry and fight him. And I got so that I went along with him pretty good, and we were pretty good pals. And I remember one day we was walking down along there, and we got quite a ways ahead of the old man, and the old man said, "Hey, you get back here," he said. "I think you always down the spot since you started school, don't you? I learned you a trick with a head with holes through it." So we had to kind of slow up and get back a little bit, and I just don't remember exactly when this happened, or this what I'm going to tell. But anyway, we had a wide walk, about 12 feet wide, that went from the main street of Brownsville up to the schoolhouse. Well, the schoolhouse was a 4-room schoolhouse, and they had 2 grades in each room. And the kids all played together, the boys and the girls played together. Now, in the back, they had a partition down through between, right in the middle, and the girls was on one side, and the boys was on the other. This school was, the playground was made so that the girls played on one side and the boys played on the other side. And there was a big high wall right down through the middle of the playground back of the schoolhouse. And this little Negro boy, he was always in trouble with some kids. Some of them didn't like him, but I always got along with him pretty good. And one day he got into a fight with a boy called Hinker McGee. Well, Hinker got the best of him and bloodied him up quite a lot, so we got him and to put him around under this pump. Now, this pump was about halfway up the sidewalk, and it was just off to one side. You could stand right on the sidewalk and pump the water, and it was a great big wide wooden trough that the surplus water went into, and it was a pitcher pump. And we got him there and cleaned him all up and got him fixed up pretty good. And so then we took him over to the barber shop. His dad was a barber and run a barber shop over in the town, about halfway across the town. And I used to like him real well. We just got along real good, him and I did. I guess that's about all. The time must be up. Got it all right now, eh? When we used to live up on Rock Creek, now that's a little place out of Potlatch, where quite a few folks moved up in on land that belonged to the Potlatch Lumber Company for timber. They had bought for timber. And lots of people went in and bought this land, and the company reserved the timber. Well, we was in that bunch. And Walter Schaefer and Leela, his wife, By the way, Leila was one of my wife, Margaret's, old friends. They went to school together, started together. Well, Walter and I, we was good friends, and he lived right close by us, and he had a place leased at this time, and he lived in the house there, and he had 4 head of horses, and him and I had cut up quite a lot of 16-inch wood down in the flat, real good wood, and there come a big snow that winter. We had an awful bad snow, and I don't know just how I wasn't working in town at the mill, but I wasn't for a while at least. And they had taken Walter Schaefer over to Moscow to the hospital because he had arthritis awful bad. He had a bad job down at the mill. It was wet and cold all the time where he was working. And he'd been over there quite a little bit, so I hitched up one of these teams to a buggy that we had of our own, Margaret and I had. And I drove her over to see him over at Moscow when he had this arthritis. But anyway, he stayed over there for quite a long time after that, but he didn't seem to get much better. Well, then he come back home, and he come back to his home right close to where we lived, and he lived there for a while, and then eventually he sold his horses off, and he sold his place, and he moved over to what's the name of the town? Over to, Onaway, a little old town called Onaway. It didn't amount to nothing. Had little old sidewalks and board sidewalks. They moved over there, and they put what money they had into this house, and they lived into the house. And he got awful mean to her. He thought she ought to treat him a little better or something, and they had an awful lot of trouble, and finally he got so bad that they took him down to his sister's out at Battle Mountain, Washington. And he stayed there for quite a little while, and we used to go out and see him after we had left Rock Creek and moved down to Cove Orchard, Oregon.
Not sure about Leila in the telephone.
And when they was living on the Joe Hogan place, this wood that we had cut, and Leila run out of dry wood. Well, I took one of these teams, the smallest one, because I was looking after them and feeding them for him while he was sick. So I hitched one team up to the sled and went down and filled up the box with good dry wood to take up for her to burn. Well, I pulled up by the woodshed, and I happened to notice a piece of telephone wire laying on top of the snow. So I stopped the team and fastened the lines up good, and I got out, and I went over, and I picked up this wire by my hand, and it was there, the end of it, where it had broke. And Leila, Walter's wife, she was looking out the window, watching me out the window, and as soon as she seen me pick up this wire, she thought she'd have a little fun. She's always that way. And she went over to the wall. The phones was on the wall. They was old-time phones, and you rang them with her crank. And she went over and she gave that a great big round crank rang with that phone. And boy, she sent me putting her to try, I'll tell you. She gave me a real good burn. And then I unloaded the wood and everything went off fine. That's it. By the way, I thought I'd better tell you about those coils in those telephones. Each telephone, to make the thing work and to make it go, has 2 coils into it, and each one of them are 6-volt coils. Those are batteries. And whenever you turn the crank and ring the bell, well, that goes out on the line and it rings the other person's phone. And on this case, it wasn't connected, and my hands was wet, my feet was wet, and I was the one that got all of the jolt, instead of it going out through the line to call other people. That's it.
What was this about you and Leila? You used to be sweethearts. I hear something about that, Dad.
Now this is Orville Mackey talking now, and I'm going to sing a little song. It isn't very long. Oh, you never seem too silly or Johnston, I and my friends in the valley. We was walking down the road one day, of course my best was Riley. I found a watch and a chain for his party, soon did complain, and I handed it over to Riley. For Riley and I were chums, and we always shared. Stop it. When I and my friends in the Riley, we was walking down the road one day, of course my best was Riley. I found a watch and a chain for his party, soon did complain, and I seen he done it so awfully wildy. But I seen by the flickering light of the gas, the watch it was gold and the chain it was brass, so the chain it went over to Riley. For Riley and I were chums, and we always shared. If there was anything good about, now take my word, when I was done, I handed it over to Riley. One day I thought that it'd get me a wife, for I thought that she'd be the joy of my life. Well, she acted so awfully wildy. One day she thought she'd have some fun. She chased me around the house with a gun. And I said, oh, gal, you and I are done. So I handed her over to Riley. For Riley and I were chums, and we always shared. Black ties and sugar plums of every little hair we cared. When there is anything good about, now take my word. When I was done, I handed it over to Riley.
Dad, tell us about the time that you went down the Jordan Valley.
Okay, I'll just do my best. This is a true story that happened in about 1907, as near as I can recollect. I'm going to call him Wayne. I had a stepbrother. His name was Wayne Keeney, and he lived down at Jordan Valley, Oregon, out in the sticks, out in the wild desert. And we had previously got married in 1906, and he wanted me to come, and I didn't have the money to come down with, and he wanted me to come down and take a homestead and live down there with him. Well, we had a cow that my wife's folks had give us, so we decided to sell this cow, and we got $35 for her, and for me to take this money and go down and see this stepbrother, Wayne, of mine, at Jordan Valley, Oregon. Well, I started out, and I took the train from Potlatch, Idaho, and I went down to Palouse City and changed cars again, and I went on down to Pendleton, and by that time it was getting late in the evening. And I took a train out of Pendleton, and I went over as far as Caldwell, Idaho, and I made a mistake and went too far. I had to go back to Nampa in order to catch a stagecoach drawn by horses, 4 head of horses. And I went back, and it took me until the next morning to get back there and find this stagecoach place, to get the stage to go out to where my stepbrother was supposed to have been at Jordan Valley. Well, I took the stage out in the morning. The next morning I got down to Napa, and we were supposed to go through 65 miles in the one day. And as I recollect, it was on Saturday. And we started out real early in the morning, and we got about halfway down to Jordan Valley, not quite halfway, and we run into a big bunch of gumbo. If you don't know what that is, it's thick, heavy mud that packs into your wheels and the spokes of your stagecoach, and your horses can hardly get through. And we got stuck in that, and we had to stay all night at a farmhouse. The stage driver, he made arrangements to keep us at the farmhouse with the men there. And the next morning, the man at the farm, where they was feeding cattle, he took a team of horses, of big horses that he had, and went down and pulled the stage out of the gumbo, and this was on Sunday morning. And then after they got it out of the gumbo, why, the driver brought his horses and hooked on, and we went on into Jordan Valley. And we got in there about noon on Sunday. And I took my little old suitcase that I had with me, and I went to the hotel, and I inquired around for this stepbrother Wayne of mine, and I found out that he was 35 miles out beyond Jordan Valley, and I tried to, there was no stage out there to go to ride, and I tried to get a saddle horse to go on, and there was no saddle horses. I went to the livery barn, and they had none. Well, then I stayed that day there, and the next morning, I just took my overcoat that I had with me, and I left my suitcase at the hotel. And I started to walk out this 35 miles out to the Owyhee River, where my stepbrother was staying on a homestead that he was taking up in the Level Valley part of the country. And I got about, it was in March, and there was quite a lot of snow on the ground, and the weather had warmed up and it was melting, and the streams, which were several of them, that I had to ford by foot. There was no bridges, and I had to walk across these streams. And I got out quite a long ways out from town between where I was going and where I had started from, and I came to a farmhouse, and I stopped there to get some information on how to go and how much farther I had to walk to get there to where my stepbrother Wayne was at. And this was a very nice fellow that was there. He was there feeding cattle through the winter time for the man that owned the cattle. And he asked me if I wouldn't like to stay all night with him, and I was keen to jump at the chance. So I stayed all night, and he gave me my supper and my breakfast the next morning, and I bid him goodbye and thanked him for his kindness, and I went on. And about 2 o'clock that afternoon, I got out to where my stepbrother lived, and when I got there, I found that there was another man and his wife and 2 little girls that they had. Now this was March, and I don't know where they went to school, the thing about that. But they were out there taking up a homestead, and all of them were living right there together, close together, and my stepbrother, he had a tent up that he slept in, but they all eat in the big tent where the family lived. So I got out there to this place about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was awfully tired. I had waded those streams. My pants legs were wet, sometimes up to my crotch, maybe a little more sometimes. It was an awful hard trip.
Your feet were awful sore, too.
My feet began to get sore. And then, when I got there, why, they fixed me up something to eat right away, give me some coffee, and fixed me up a real good meal. And I ate that, and I was resting very nicely. And my stepbrother Wayne says, he called me Jack at that time. He said, Jack, I've got a bunch of traps over on the Owyhee River. And he said, I would like awful well to go over and see if I've got anything in those traps. So I told him, okay, I'll just go along with you. And we started out after I had got my dinner after 2 o'clock. Well, it wasn't very long until dark come, because it was short days. Well, we went on out to this river, or the north fork of the Owyhee. And when we got to that place, why, he had traps set about a mile, I would presume, possibly a half a mile apart. There was 3 traps that he had something in. He had 2 bobcats and a coyote. And we skinned these bobcats out. I didn't know much about it, but I helped him what I could. And we skinned those bobcats out, and we carried those pelts back up to the tents where they had the tents fixed up. And by the way, these tents had wooden floors, lumber floors, and lumber up 4 feet on either side, all around, and one door in one end, and one window in the other end. Well, we got back up there, and we stayed there for the next day so I could kind of rest up a little bit. And the only livestock they had was one little saddle pony. Well, then my stepbrother, Wayne, asked me then if I wanted to go back in to Jordan Valley. And I asked him if he needed to go, and he said yes, he needed to go on some business. So we went, and we just took this one little pony, and he had a big lot of pelts. That's the skin off of these things that he had caught to take in to sell. He wanted to sell them and get the money out of them. So we took these pelts and we rolled them up real tight and tied them on the back of the saddle, and we took turnabout riding and walking. And we got several miles, I presume around 4 or 5 miles from where he lived, down in the flat valley, kind of up on the sloping ground, on the hillsides more, away from the valley. And we come to a big farmhouse, a real big ranch, where they had many cattle that they were feeding, and there were several men there, and a family there feeding these cattle. And they were good friends of Wayne's. So he borrowed a saddle horse from these folks, and him and I then had a saddle horse to ride, and we started on into Jordan Valley. And we got about halfway in, and we come to a cabin where a man lived along a little creek that we had to ford. And we went across this little creek, and here was this cabin, and there was a man of bats in there and a trapper. And when we got there, it was pretty well along toward evening. And he asked us to stay all night, so we was very anxious to do that, and we jumped at his invitation. And he got us a meal for supper, and got something to drink, some coffee and so on. And he had a little small stove in this little cabin, and he had caught some beaver, and he took a beaver ham, and he had in the oven, and he roasted it. And by the way, he'd been out himself of getting pelts. He caught some bobcats and coyotes that day. So when he got this supper, he asked us if we liked baked beaver ham. And I told him, as I remember, that I'd never tasted it. I don't remember just what Wayne did tell him. But anyway, we had supper, and it was very good. He sliced it off nice with a good knife, and he got it very nice. And we had supper, and he put us up that night and gave us our breakfast the next morning. And when we got ready to leave, why, he wouldn't take nothing for it at all. So we thanked him very much for it, because he was a good friend of my stepbrother Wayne. And we went on our journey on into Jordan Valley. We both had a horse to ride, which we were very thankful for. And we rode on in to Jordan Valley. And we got in almost to Jordan Valley, and there was a bunch of men with a lot of wild horses in a corral. And they was going to break some of them to ride, and we got along there just about in time to see one man get on one of these horses. There's 2 or 3 men that held him, and this one man got on this horse, and he stayed with it, I would judge, for possibly 5 minutes or maybe a little longer, and the horse bucked him off. And they had a last rope around his neck so he couldn't get away, and the men there held him. And then we went on into Jordan Valley, and we got in there pretty well long in the evening. And Wayne, he took these pelts and sold these pelts, got his pay for them, and he done what business he could do that night. And we went to the hotel,
And we both stayed at the hotel that night. We got a double bed, and we both stayed in the same room at the hotel. And I had left my suitcase there with some clothes in, and I got some other clothes and put them on. And the next morning, we got everything all fixed up, and he asked me if I would like to go out to South Mountain.
Tell them about your sore feet.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell that now. And by that time, when we had gotten back into Jordan Valley, my feet got awful sore because I had just an ordinary pair of leather shoes on and waded all of that water going out and part of it coming back before we got the extra horse. And my feet got so sore I could hardly walk. They had blisters on them. And when we got to Jordan Valley, I went to the store. My brother Wayne, stepbrother Wayne, went with me. And we looked all over the store to find a pair of rubbers of some kind that I could wear that would be easy on my feet and something to put on those sores in the way of medication. And we couldn't find a thing with the exception of little overshoes that you put on over your shoes. Well, I bought a pair of those, and I took paper and put in the heels and plugged the heels up higher so I could walk. And I tied them on my feet with a string, and I got some good dry socks that I had taken with me, some heavy wool socks, and put them on. And the next day after we had gotten these, I started out to South Mountain. And it took us practically a whole day, as I remember. We got out there along about 4 o'clock in the evening, and we hadn't had any dinner. And we pulled in there, we rode in rather, to this place where these men were feeding cattle, and there was 5 or 6 men there. And they were feeding cattle. They were a nice, real nice bunch of guys. Wayne knew them all. And we had a pretty good time there that night. Of course, it's kind of wild. And they didn't seem to do much drinking, but they did play cards and tell stories. And they furnished us a nice bed. We was well treated. And the next morning, we got ready to start back to come back into Jordan Valley again. And the head man of the cattle ranch that was there, feeding the cattle, told the men that was working for him that he was going into town to get a load of supplies. And they took 4 horses, and they hitched them on to what we call a hack. It was a rig between, it was 4 wheels like a wagon, and it was between a small buggy and a wagon. And it was pulled with 4 horses, and it was called a hack, a regular hack. So he took those 4 horses in the hack, and he invited us to tie our horses behind and ride in the hack with him, which we did. When we got into Jordan Valley, we took the horses and put them in the livery barn, and we went to the hotel, and we just kind of fooled around the hotel there. And I was getting pretty well in and didn't feel too good, and I was kind of aggravated or set up with the whole deal. And so I told Wayne, I said, Wayne, I believe that time has come that I must go back home. And he said, all right. And he had sold these pelts, and he had a little money, and he gave me a little bit of money. I don't know how much it was, but I had only had $35 to go with altogether, and of course I was running a little short on money. So he gave me a little bit, possibly $10. And he knew a man that just came in from Nampa driving 6 mules. And he had started out from Nampa, and he got out as far as what they called the Rock. That was about halfway between Nampa and Jordan Valley. And it was in March, and the boat course was lots of water, roads was bad, and this man couldn't go on any farther with both wagons with the 6 mules. Well, he just unhooked the back wagon, and he left it at the Rocks. They just called it the Rocks. No Rockville, but the Rocks. It was a hotel, a place to put up people, and a little bit of a store. And so Wade took a notion to get this man to take me in, which suited me real fine. So I got in with my suitcase, baggage and all, and I got in the wagon with him, and he was an awful nice man, treated me nice, and we drove in there. I would presume it's about 35 miles, because it's 65 miles from Jordan Valley into Nampa. And when we got in there to the rocks, he stayed all night at the rocks, and so did I. Well, then the next morning, there was a stage coach, the same as I went out on, pulled with horses, that went back to Nampa. And so I went and got my arrangements all made at the rocks, and I got into this stagecoach, and going back to Nampa, we made it all right. We didn't get stuck in the gumbo. And when we got to Nampa, why, I caught the train and went back into Pendleton, and then I changed cars at Pendleton, and I went back to Potlatch, Idaho, where I started from, and I was a happy boy to get back home.